It is just about 1 minute after the top of the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and formally kick us off and introduce the folks on this panel. Folks continue to come in. So just as a reminder to everyone in the audience, there's a Q&A function at the bottom. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from, what you're looking forward to hearing. All of the panelists can see that as well. So good morning from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm sitting in a hotel room, super excited because I am attending the Sustainable Ag Summit in person this year, which is great to be back together with so many like-minded folks. This webinar that's brought to you by Corteva and Farm Journal's Trust and Food Program is actually intended to sort of be a stage setter, sort of to help kickstart the conversations that are going to be happening here amongst those of us that are able to attend in person and those that will be following along the Sustainable Ag Summit online and through some of the live stream as well. So it's great to be here with you all. I'm Amy Skoczlas Cole. I lead Farm Journal's Trust and Food Program. Trust and Food is really Farm Journal's commitment to making sure that we take the 145-year history that we have had of helping ensure that agricultural producers meet with success and make sure that we're helping today's producers make the transition to more climate smart, regenerative, economically sustainable, and environmentally sustainable forms of agriculture. And so I'm super excited to be your facilitator for this conversation today. We've got a great lineup, and I'm going to be turning over to the panelists in just a second here. Let me just say that the way this came about is our friends at Corteva are part of a movement called America's Conservation Ag Movement that the Farm Journal Foundation and Farm Journal Trust and Food run together with about 17 private sector partners, including Corteva, as well as the NRCS. We think it is one of the largest efforts working public and private on focusing on really putting the farmer at the center of the conversation around sustainable ag. And so we're really proud to bring you this content here today as part of America's Conservation Ag Movement. I'm going to introduce our panel real quick, and then just to tee up for you folks who are going to be answering questions here, and I get to stop talking, we're going to start off the conversation with a little bit about how each of us and our organizations thinks about what regenerative agriculture is, and then we're going to dive right into what the intersection is with consumers and changing consumer expectations here. So let me just read down who our panelists are with us today. They'll probably be in different places on your screen, but I'll kind of point as I go along here. We've got Anjali Marok, who is the Global Responsibility Leader at Corteva. Good morning, Anjali. Chris Adamo, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs, Policy, and Partnerships with Danone. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Stephen James is joining us. He's the Senior Director of Global Procurement at the PepsiCo company. Hey, Stephen. And Michael Doan, who is the Global Managing Director of Food and Freshwater Systems at the Nature Conservancy. Hey, Michael, good to see you. And last, but probably most importantly, Brad Clark, who is a row crop and dairy farmer in Wisconsin, and part of Corteva's Climate Positive Leaders Farming Program. Hey, Brad, good to see you. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And Anjali, I'm going to kick it off to you to start with. When Corteva thinks about regenerative agriculture, what do you think about? Is there a clear definition in your minds? And how does your company think about contributing to it?
Absolutely, Amy, and thanks so much for the question, for having us all together here today. You know, within Corteva, we really look at regenerative agriculture as a farming system. It's a farming system that's designed to optimize profitability and sustainability while replenishing and improving natural resources like soil, water, biodiversity to ensure that production is resilient for farmers, communities, and society for generations to come. What we keep a very keen eye on is the fact that what that means for each farmer is different because every acre is different. Farming systems differ all around the world. And that's really the essence for us and what we're focused on. And for us, that means that what we're focused on is an outcome. And I believe that we're all working on that outcome. And so if we can get beyond the word itself, today we're talking about regenerative agriculture, regardless of what we call it, this outcome that we're really seeking to accomplish is what's important and what I think we are all trying to work on together. We have to be working on those solutions collaboratively to support farmers in achieving the outcomes that they're hoping to achieve. I think that's really where we see the definition and the focus.
That really resonates. Brad, do you want to pick up from there and talk about both how that fits or doesn't fit with your operation, and tell us a little bit about how you think about regenerative agriculture within your operation?
Yeah. In my mind, regenerative ag is when you acquire something, especially land, it should be in better shape than when you, or at least as good as you when you took control of it, and to make positive end results on the environment around you.
Fabulous. That's great. Michael, I imagine you all spend just a little bit of time in your shop thinking about this at the Nature Conservancy. And I know that you work internationally as well as domestically, but when you think about regenerative agriculture in the US and US systems, what are we talking about from your point of view?
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. It's a great and important conversation to be having, and especially right as we go into the summit there in Las Vegas. The Nature Conservancy, we're an environmental organization. We focus on conservation. We're not farmers, we're not ranchers, but we have a lot of respect for people that grow food and really take the risk to manage these landscapes, manage the resources that we're talking about, whether it's land, fresh water. Regenerative, I think, is a term that is catching on because it really feels like it's the necessary action right now. I would say, over the last 10 or 20 years, the ag sector has really matured in terms of understanding the impact that agriculture has. And there's a lot of positive impact of agriculture on livelihoods, on food security, on the economy. But there's also some negative impacts. And I think we've been doing a much better job as a sector doing a stock take on that, understanding where those impacts are and understanding what management practices can not only address or ameliorate the impacts, but now what we're seeing with regeneration is the idea that we can rebuild and restore and actually do so at a scale that is really compelling for leaders that are thinking about solutions on climate change or solutions on freshwater management or solutions on biodiversity. And in fact, in many of the places where I show up now, agriculture is seen as a solution provider. And that's really the turn that I think we're making when we go from notions of conventional or sustainable agriculture to regeneration, is a food economy that reflects this new source of value, this value creation that we desperately need as a society. And yet every farm is different. So I can't tell Brad what's going to be regenerative on his farm, just like we couldn't do that anywhere else around the world. So a list of practices is not terribly helpful here. What's important is to get clear on the outcomes. Just as Anjali was making this point, I really thought that was an important point to make. It's harder to do. It's harder to say, measure the climate impact of certain farming practices across different areas. But that's the task that's set before us, is to think about what kind of contribution can agriculture make on these issues to rebuild, to restore, to regenerate natural resources, and then have a food economy that reflects that new source of value.
I think that's really well said, and that's actually a perfect segue over to Chris, and then I'll follow him with Stephen to start helping us think about how folks in food companies think about regenerative agriculture. And then I'd love to hear a little bit, both Danone and Pepsi have made big commitments around regenerative agriculture in your supply chains. Tell us a little bit about those, but really tell us not just the what, but the why.
Yeah, absolutely. So very similarly, we are evolving in our definition of regenerative agriculture as well. We set some high macro pillars around crop systems, around animal systems. Obviously, we're a dairy company, so animal systems are incredibly important, and also farmer welfare. So starting with those three very broad pillars, we're thinking about how do we draw the connection, how do we make the connection between the producers in our value chain all the way to the consumers and our customers, right? So we're a consumer products good companies. We make yogurts, we make organic fluid milk with Horizon, we make plant-based alternatives such as silk almond based. So our job is to work with farms. We need to draw that direct connection with our suppliers and actually create the outcomes with them. And that's something we're now working in year 4 of our efforts to develop those different strategies so that producers can find the different solutions and that we can help them quantify, help them verify that, help them manage that data so that we can then carry that story up or down, rather, the value chain to our various consumers and customers. So we're in the middle of the whole value chain, and we're trying to create the strategy which links all the different pieces together. And I think one of the key things, and we've already said outcomes, but verifiable outcomes that folks can trust, outcomes that folks can understand what the full spectrum of value is, both on the economic side and the environmental side.
Great. Stephen, where would you take that from a PepsiCo standpoint?
I'm emboldened to hear a number of the elements we find important also reflected in what's been said previously. So, when Michael and Brad both highlighted, the concept of regenerative approaches to the land and leaving land better than what it was in the past, I think that's part of our perspective around regenerative ag outcomes. And then Anjali, Chris, and Michael also highlighted outcomes and the importance of that. So it's not just doing something for the sake of doing it, but doing it to drive an outcome. And that too is how we see this. And we framed the outcomes into 5 buckets, if you will. One is around soil health and fertility. A second is around watershed stewardship, good watershed management. The third one is around carbon sequestration and GHG emission reduction, if you will. The fourth one is around biodiversity on the landscapes. And the last one has been mentioned prior is around farmer livelihoods. Farmers and the people that are integral in this supply chain, these value chains. How do we think about taking them along as in this journey, if you will? And Amy, you asked some stacked questions there, but one of them was, what's the role that a food company plays in communicating that to the consumers? Yes, but also why is this important now? And clearly there's reasons around environmental and social responsibility in the value chains. But if you come back to where Chris was speaking from, which is the consumer's moving really quickly in this space and are expecting transparency. And as he mentioned, trusted and credible information about the supply chain that's reflected in the products that they buy and the brands that they love. And that's moving really quickly. 2 decades ago, we were sort of internally focused and we were working on energy efficiency in our plants and our fleets and water management. And now it's quickly gone from what we do inside, our supply chain, all the way back to the farm gate. And we have millions and millions of farmers in our supply chain. So this just becomes a really challenging task as we look forward. But one that the industry, I think, is taking on, and rightfully so. There's going to be benefits up and down through the value chain, but we have a good amount of work ahead of us as well.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue, Stephen, to just go a little bit deeper about what we know about where consumers are on this. And I'd welcome any of you to chime in and share. I think we all can read the headlines, feel the move towards consumers demanding more from our food system. You mentioned transparency. We talked about verifiable outcomes, trusted, credible information. what do we know about whether folks are thinking about their own health and wellness, or whether they're thinking about the planet's health and wellness, or whether they're thinking about the health and wellness economically of the farmer? What do we know about that? Chris, do you have information from a Danone standpoint on where you think your consumers are headed?
So we do, and it's constantly evolving, right? This isn't a static conversation, and we're constantly learning about what consumers in different segments are wanting and expecting. And I think we need to first start with the premise that the consumer is continuing to learn and want different things too. So it's not about one thing. And frankly, the issue of planetary concerns and personal health are more and more being mixed on top of each other. There's a strong Venn diagram there that I think we all need to explore, and we certainly think about at Danone. But it's all the above. Certainly some consumers are going to be concerned perhaps more on the planet. Everybody's concerned about individual health, just depends how you ask the question, but we all are thinking about what we need to be doing for ourselves on a daily basis. And that's certainly reflective in a lot of our healthy products. But I think, and we encounter this a lot, people want to know what is the one thing that consumers are thinking about, or what's the one driver. It's not one driver, it's a multitude of drivers. And I think accepting that and working from there is often the most productive from our standpoint.
Terrific. Anybody else have thoughts to share?
I might jump in on this one, Amy. We about a year ago, just as we felt like we were kind of flying right into the teeth of the pandemic, we actually did survey consumers in 8 countries and also food companies and employees about these issues. And really what we were trying to understand was in relationship to the pandemic, and had attitudes started to shift. And actually what we were thinking could be the case is that maybe some of the environmental issues we're talking about could be lower in terms of like near-term priorities for consumers or food companies. In fact, what we found was the pandemic, if anything, tightened up the relationship between concerns on, say, water quality and safety and hygiene, or supply chains and resilience and climate risk. And so what we've found, actually, without digging into all the crosstabs and data, is it's reinforced the thesis that the food system is important. It's never been more important than it is now in light of the pandemic, to focus on more resilience and more positive contribution from the food system in attention to these issues. So I think that regeneration, if you will, has been lifted by this, by the sensitivities raised around the pandemic, that we can't take for granted any longer how important the food system is, and we need to build in resilience and restoration into the food system in the way that it's the way it fits into the economy.
Absolutely, Michael, I couldn't agree more with that. When we think about, and we've been running a global food security index for a number of years now, and there was a stark takeaway that emerged this year, and it's something that's been coming for a while, but we are in a year among a string of years in which food security is actually on the decline globally. And so when you talk about, and I love the way that you said that, Michael, about the need, the urgency for resilience, and really that doubling down of focus, not only from consumers, but also from farmers, and indeed in and beyond our value chain, on how are we really going to address the fact that there is an urgency, there is a fire underneath the need to address these challenges, that all of these different pieces, from the consumer perspective to what we're seeing in terms of security and understanding the challenge ahead of us to continue to feed a growing population, that all signs point to this opportunity to really start to bridge that understanding, continue that learning, both from a scientific standpoint as well as from a consumer standpoint, and start to rebuild those solutions with agriculture at the center, with farmers very much at the center of it. And there's a lot that we can already learn from the progress that's been already made, which is why at Corteva we've established this Climate Positive Leaders program to learn from farmers like Brad. And Brad, I wonder if you have a perspective here as well, because this journey that we are on is one that is long-standing, much more to come. But all of these pieces are complex and coming together in this way because we're really starting to grapple with what systems evolution, systems change, system level outcomes look like That's what's particularly important and critical at this time. And what our research tells us is that consumers have a very high degree of trust in growers, and they want growers to succeed. So when we're talking about that transparency, when we're talking about that connectivity, there is a real opportunity that I think that we all share across this panel to help to support not just the outcomes, but to also support that connectivity and that understanding from all corners to drive this work forward.
So I think that it looks like Brad may have dropped off for just a second. I'm sure he'll rejoin us, and I'm looking forward to hearing him, reflect on some of this. But why don't we stay with consumers for just a second? What do you all see as how consumers want to receive this information? Are we talking about, I almost hate to say it, like a new name, a new label? Are we going to go to market competitively in that way? So let's dive in there for a second. How do you do it, Stephen?
I think a key that we've highlighted is, transparency. So consumers want to be able at point of purchase to have some transparency and some understanding about the conditions of the value chain that got that product, onto their store shelf or showed up at their front door these days, I guess. And I think we've got a couple of examples where, we can learn from. One is if you think about nutritional labeling on products, the work that Codex does, it's across an awful lot of countries. But we're pretty good at understanding that you can turn a package around, look at the back, see a nutritional label, and it looks pretty much the same as you go around the world, right? That's a really nice piece of standardization, and it increases transparency, in this case around nutrition, to consumers that engage with that product. I think we can see a place where we're going to have something akin to that as it relates to sustainability. There's some companies out there that are already talking about labeling greenhouse gas footprints, and it's complicated, but I think we're going to move in that direction because I think it's the most clean way to talk to consumers without any hype, without a new name. It's just here's the facts you need to know about the product that you have. If you want to make a claim on front of pack because it's now has 10% less carbon than what it did a year ago, go ahead, but the facts still live there for every consumer to read and understand, just like they do nutrition today, if you will. So I think that's part of the transparency and how we might go about building consumer trust in the products that they buy every day.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one? How do we think this information gets to consumers?
Yeah, I think we're still learning how to do that, right? I think number one, we start in other places probably that aren't consumer first sort of places. We report information to different indexes, different investor indexes, the Climate Disclosure Project, CDP is an example. We're going to see more investor pressure, perhaps through our SEC here in the United States. So there's a number of ways the information is starting to get out. Clearly, you can come to our websites and see different information, but even there, it's not good enough, frankly, yet. We're still learning how to extract this information. And, as for us, we're 4 years into a journey. That's not enough to tell you what all the outcomes are going to be yet. We're still learning about those outcomes. And frankly, that'll be the case for years to come. So it is very much a journey for us. I'll point to one example within our family of brands, Horizon Organic. If you go to their website right now, this is a beginning for us. We're now starting to tell the story about things like climate change on that website. You can look and see our life cycle analysis for that brand. You can start to see some examples about where we can make investments to lower the greenhouse gas impact in that brand. This is still early days. There's going to be more to come. Clearly, not every consumer is going to go to a corporate website and get information. Some will, some won't. I agree with where Stephen said. We're going to learn about other ways to put this on pack. On pack is already a very crowded place, right? And there's a lot of things coming at the consumer. We're going to have to find standardized ways so that, as Stephen said, to get the facts first and foremost, and then there can be accompanying claims. That's probably, I agree, that's probably where this is headed. Exactly how and when, I think, is still to be determined.
That is super interesting. And I feel like you all are speaking more definitively about this information in consumers' hands in the near future in sort of kind of on label ways than I have heard us talk about. So interesting to know. So Brad, I know we're experiencing some internet problems. So let me know if you can hear us and all seems like it's working for you now. But we've spent the last 5 or 10 minutes talking about consumers' expectations on farmers and regeneration. And we know that in the United States, 98% of consumers actually do not have a connection to a farm any longer. And so what we're really talking about is a lot of people who don't know your business putting expectations on your business, right? I'm curious how that makes you feel, whether it's driving the leadership that you're doing on your farm and just how you think about that. Is this a fair thing for consumers to be asking of you?
Yes, it is a fair thing. If everybody can hear me, correct? Okay.
You sound terrific. Yep.
Yeah, it is a fair thing. The reason we got to the forefront of this is we own the direction of change. If we can do that before we're regulated to do it, we'll have more say in what happens for the consumer and the quality of product that we turn out to the consumer. So that connection between consumer and the actual on-farm practices has to tighten up somehow.
That is, I think that's a super interesting. Why don't you, I don't think we've given you a chance to share a little bit of what being out front looks like for your operation. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you're actually doing and maybe a little bit of why?
Well, the past 5 years, we've had extreme rainfall events that led us to believe that it was damaging our soil and ecosystem. So we moved to cover crops to maintain our soil health, water retention in our driftless area. And we've seen huge benefits of erosion, soil loss across the board, And as in other parts of the country, it ain't normal events anymore. It's an extreme event that'll push people to move forward in these situations.
And so what has been your experience with what you're doing? How many years have you been doing it? What's been your experience? Are you feeling positive about it still? And is it costing you money?
We started some cover crops 5 to 7 years ago. This was the first spring that we were 99% no-till with cover crops. The 1 to 2, 98, 99, the 1 to 2% is in the river bottoms where it's a minimum till just to open it up to get it to dry out. So we're not really disturbing deep earth layer, Yes, it does cost money. Cover crops aren't free. Application is not free, but we are saving passes across the field. We're saving 3 tillage passes. So that's kind of end of the year. We'll know our numbers on that. Fuel, labor, just the soil. The soil health is tremendous. People drive by, and it's green. Right now, if you were at our place, all the fields around us are green, and that is not normal this time of year.
Certainly not. Certainly not. That's phenomenal, and that's great to hear. And so, Brad, you were one of the climate positive leaders this year for Corteva. Anjali, you're really involved in that program. Is Brad's experience sort of what you're hearing from the folks that you're working with? What else are you hearing?
So, you know, Brad's experience is representative of what Brad is seeing on his farm. And I have to come back to the fact that what Brad produces on his farm is so different from each of the different winners, each of the different farmers that we are learning from right now, right? We've got Brad here in Wisconsin. We have others all across the world. We have a Canadian representation, Australian, Kenyan, Brazilian representation, very different operations, very different needs for practices. But the common thread, once again, is that desire to continue to replenish, to restore, to build up not just the land, but the ability to produce today and for the long term. And the challenges are different, but even there, some common threads about, yes, this costs money. There has to be a mechanism for value back to the farmer for all of this work that's happening. And some of it comes through the benefits and cost savings. We've heard some of the farmers speak about that. We've heard about improvements in profitability because of yield increases, quality increases that are being recognized in the marketplace. And beyond all of that, then starting to talk about the value that comes from generating what many of us in this industry call the ecosystem assets or the ecosystem services that are being generated. All of the benefits that are coming from the potential to sequester carbon, the regeneration of that soil, the benefits of that biodiversity on that land, and the water quality certainly that some of our fellow panelists have talked about, all of those different things that then have downstream and ripple effects throughout our natural ecosystem. These are tremendous outcomes. They're harder to measure. I think we've talked about that a little bit, and that complexity, I think, is a nut that we really need to continue to work to crack and to determine how best to be supportive of that. And to what Steve and Chris were talking about with transparency and what consumers are looking for, that starts with the ability to understand and measure those outcomes and back that with best science, for knowing that this is not just measurable, but this is really doing what we hope for it to do this season and create those outcomes for a longer period of time as well. So, a lot of this then comes back to how do we think about taking these lessons, understanding these challenges from a breadth, from a diversity of production operations from these farmers and from a variety of geographies, that we can really start to talk about a global agricultural system and what is needed to support that. And so, from this panel, I look to farmers like Brad and their other climate positive winners to help us to learn, to help us to understand what those needs are, that we can continue to support. And again, that notion of urgency that is there, we know the challenge that's ahead of us. And as an agriculture inputs company, what we can contribute to that is the breadth of tools that support innovation for farmers and ranchers for what their farming systems need. And what we're really looking to understand then is what does that look like? What is the breadth of tools that's needed? And how can we be bringing that forward in the most supportive way? Because the urgency and the pace of change that we're talking about requires those tools to keep up with demand, with the needs of consumers, and with the ability to address these big problems around these big global challenges around food security and climate, and ensuring that the land can support increased production on an acre for many, many years to come.
I love your point about having a breadth of tools, a portfolio available. There is a constant theme in this conversation. It's also over in the Q&A. So I'm just going to remind everyone who's listening that we are following along in the Q&A. Thanks to everyone who shared where you're from. Thanks to everyone that's sharing questions and comments. I'm trying to read those quickly and get them incorporated here, so keep them coming. So there is this strong theme of, and anyone who's actually been on a farming operation knows that they're all very, very different. But I'm curious, Anjali, and then Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question. What kind of tools are you thinking about from where you sit today that can be part of a portfolio for a producer like Brett?
Absolutely. I think this breadth cuts across a number of different pieces. I'll start close to home with Corteva, that we look at the breadth of capabilities that come to being able to provide best seed to farmers. That really is the heart and soul of what gets produced, and how that supports crop production as well as livestock production. Crop protection products and applied technologies, synthetic and biological, are necessary tools for these outcomes that help to ensure that optimization can take place as well. And so we look to continuing to improve the attributes, the benefits of those sorts of solutions as well, so that we can continue, so that we can be advancing what the opportunity that farmers have to drive that efficiency, drive that optimization on their operations. And their digital tools really can help to see the farm as a system and support that profitability by informing in-season decisions and really starting to pull all of these different variables that each of us may be looking at differently and start to look at it a bit more holistically. Take that multi-season, multi-generational look and make smarter and smarter decisions over time. And that agronomic support, that supportive practices, I know we are talking about outcomes, and that doesn't change, but complementing the tools and the agronomic tools that exist because of that put together is really where the strength lies. And I think there we need to acknowledge that there is room and opportunity again for advancement in the science, advancement in the understandings that we can continue to unlock, while also learning and recognizing from what has worked well, and recognize the amount of progress that we have been able to achieve over the many decades here in the United States already, and centuries if you think about proven and native practices, as well as you think about more modern practices. So we have to think about the best of all of these pieces, bring them together in a way that really helps to optimize that outcome.
Yeah, I love that you remind us that this is not all new, right? There are many pieces of regenerative agriculture that are well rooted in our indigenous and native cultures. Michael, what do you think about the portfolio of tools? What's the Conservancy working on?
Yeah, I really thank you for the question, because I think it's easy, in settings like this to just wax romantic about the idea of regeneration. Well, we should all do that, shouldn't we? And wouldn't it be a great idea? And it's a very happy idea. It's hard to farm. It's hard to manage livestock. This is a hard job. And so most farmers and ranchers I know are not thinking esoterically about regeneration. They're trying to keep the cows in, they're trying to get the corn harvested, they're trying to pay the bills. And so I think, and we published in our roadmap to soil health in the US a few years ago, the idea that first and foremost is we have to help farmers operationalize this on their landscapes. It can't be this hard, and so there's a real need for innovation here. And that's why I'm grateful for the Cortevas and the Danones and the PepsiCos and the Brad Clarks who are innovating in this regard. We're not going to do that as the Nature Conservancy. We're an environmental NGO, and we want to be a catalyst. And so we want to support projects that show working prototypes of what this kind of change could look like, and bring some public finance into that, bring partners together where we can see that there could be some catalysts and synergies. But ultimately, and I think, Bill Gates wrote a book here about a year ago about climate change. And what he talked about, I think, is something that I'd really like to leave people with, which is the need to reduce the green premium, which is really about helping innovate toward the operational necessities of what regenerative farming and ranching looks like. And so that takes us much more toward investing in production efficiencies. And so weed control, better planting systems, better management of the pest spectrum. When you start to go to a continuous green living cover system, these things don't get enough attention, and they need to get more attention. And so the one thing I would say, though, is when I look around the world, and we have work going on all around the world on this. The US is right now in a real pole position to really make that turn, to really make that transition happen over the next decade. And we need that to happen in the US, where we can form capital, where we've got good infrastructure, we've got tremendous knowledge networks with the universities and public research and public finance, and take those lessons and then more quickly connect them in different parts of the world where those systems don't exist. So not to put too much pressure on the US here, but we kind of need the US to lead here a little bit on the innovation agenda toward regeneration.
Michael and Anjali, we've talked a little bit about, this is a really watershed moment for U.S. agriculture, right? I've been in the food, fiber, fuel world for 28 years, and this is the first time, and Michael, you said it in your upfront, Anjali, you referred to it, food is a solution. Food is a solution, not just meeting our nutritional needs, but also our health and wellness needs, our aspirations, but also as a restorative, regenerative practice. There are very few industries right now that can say that they can actually contribute far beyond their immediate carbon footprint, for instance, on greenhouse gas reductions. So that's definitely putting our agricultural systems in the spotlight, and it does appear that the U.S. is definitely on the cusp of leading. So as I look through the Q&A, a constant theme, and there's different angles to this, is around payments, financing this, pricing. And I see that folks really want to hear a bit about the role that carbon markets might play in this. Is this the way that producers are going to get paid for moving towards regenerative practices? But I also see that people want to hear about whether regenerative agriculture is going to get priced into our food in some way, and is that going to increase the cost of food? So let's just, each of you actually is in your own way involved in thinking about what can be called payments for ecosystem services, right? Where a producer is actually producing a crop that has nutritional value, and then an additional service to the ecosystem like carbon reduction or water quality, and also getting paid for that. Why don't we just do a round robin of folks, being cognizant of the time here, and talk a little bit about where you are today and where you want to go in helping ensure that there's economic benefit to farmers from these consumer expectations. And Chris, you came off mute first, so I'm gonna lead with you here.
Well, this is a great conversation. We could take another hour on this one, I think. But look, I want to say it from this standpoint, start maybe a step back. There's a lot of focus on carbon markets, carbon credits, things like offsets, those sorts of words. I'd encourage everybody to think perhaps a bit broader. What I'd argue is that markets, climate markets, carbon markets, maybe even biodiversity or water markets, these are really big ideas, and they're going to come to light perhaps in different ways. And so for one food company, buying a credit might be the right strategy, right? For another food company, and I'll put Danone more in this bucket, it's more about redefining the relationship with our suppliers and our farms and our supply chain. So yes, we are a consumer-oriented company. I've already talked about that. But what we're really trying to do is redefine the relationship and how we purchase those commodities across the world. And every commodity is going to take perhaps a slightly different strategy. Palm oil is going to be very different. Sugar is going to be very different. But how we look at dairy, our number one commodity, here in the US, or almonds, even another significant commodity for us in which we make almond milk or yogurts, thinking about redefining that relationship with the farm. And so we may not be buying a carbon credit from that farm, but what we are doing right now is setting up a service, a suite of services for those farms. So paying for and really creating the infrastructure to collect that data, do the benchmarking, do the annual monitoring, reporting, and verifying, thinking of helping the farm think through what are the options in front of them. And then finally, number 4, looking at different ways to finance. And different activities, different infrastructure practices are going to have different financial solutions in front of them too. So we're thinking about that package of services that we can set up for farms that want to participate in our supply chain, which the value of that is going to ultimately, we're still, again, year 4, we're still figuring that out, but that's going to be quantified perhaps differently than a simple carbon credit.
Who's going to jump in?
I'll jump in after. I'd echo a number of those elements as well. The question around, carbon markets, and is that going to provide value to farmers at the end of the day? I think the answer is yes. I think it is a way to recognize the value that agriculture can bring to this conversation. It's one way, not the only way, but it's one way, I think, where we can monetize this. I'd create a bit of a distinction, if you will. So there's some crops where we directly source. I'm buying potatoes for Lay's, or oranges for Tropicana, or oats for Quaker oatmeal. And we're buying those directly from a farm. And we've been working sustainability in those value chains for a long time. And we've got really strong relationships in a lot of those places. And we're going to continue to do those. As Chris mentioned, as you go over to sort of supplier sourced materials, which is, I'm buying, canola oil, or I'm buying corn oil or something, wheat flour that's been processed by another party. We too see this from the standpoint where we want to be engaged in the value chain solutions, as opposed to, a black box where someone's providing a solution and just says, well, now this is the sustainable material and I hope you have what you want. It really is going to take more engagement and more work than that. And again, it comes back to the expectations around transparency and legitimacy, to make some of the claims that we want to talk to consumers about. Is if you're just buying a solution off the shelf, and we could include, carbon credits in this as well, it's not quite as legitimate as getting out and getting dirty, and being part of creating a solution in your value chain. And I think that's important. And quite frankly, for companies that have set what's called a science-based target, you're not permitted to buy a credit anyway, to get to your target. It needs to be inside your value chain. So you need to be working inside your supply sheds. You need to be working with your processors and the farmers that reflect the work that you're doing. So I think that's absolutely going to be part of the engagement process, and it's not going to be a pass-through model per se, if you will. And you'd also asked a question around financing, Amy, and I don't mean to skirt around that, but we do pay for solutions. And, Chris mentioned palm oil earlier. I'll use it as an example because it was one of the highest forestry risk products, on the planet not that long ago. There's significant investment that flows back to the farm, back to the plantation, back to the smallholder, at this point in time to support sustainable agriculture practices in that food system. And we've got examples in the Midwest, where we also do that. And in some cases, it's supporting transition that Brad mentioned. When you first go to cover cropping, there's costs. When you first go to no-till or low-till systems, there's new costs. So yes, I think there is a way, and we're doing it now, where money is flowing back to the farm, and as it should be, quite honestly, to help through, especially in transitions to what might be a lower cost solution in the future, but isn't easy to do up front. There's some really creative solutions around insurance, as people are, moving to lower fertilizer application, trying to find the right level for their farm and things like that. So there's a suite of solutions out there. It's complex, but is there a flow of funds from, one end of the value chain to the other? The answer is yes, and I think that'll continue to grow.
That's good to hear. I want to point out, and we don't have time to respond to this, but there was a comment in the Q&A about whether this makes U.S. agriculture less competitive from a global grain pricing perspective, and so things to be thinking about. But right now, I want to go to join a new voice in the conversation here. Tara Vander Dusen is a dairy farmer and environmental scientist. She's been listening to us. She's also been tweeting about what we're working on. And it sounds like you've got a question maybe from one of your Twitter conversations, Tara, for us to consider here.
Yes, thanks for having me on. I actually have quite a few questions. I tried to narrow it down. I got a number of questions from a few different ag influencers. But one of the really great ones that we got was, what is the best thing that a consumer can do to help farmers move towards regeneration agriculture? So, I heard you guys mention, like, is this going to be a new label? And so how consumers really support farmers in that move?
Great question. Who wants to take that one?
I'll take a first cut at it, Taryn. I think there's an element of being an informed consumer, and also asking up through the value chain. Sometimes that's the store where you shop. Sometimes it's messaging that you share back to the brands where you're expecting or looking for more transparency. I think being an informed consumer and one that voices creative solutions and where you're at as a consumer and what you need and want to find on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis as a product.
Thank you. That's a great response.
I think it's important, just to build on that, I think it's important to be informed. And I think that there's been a lot of effort, to inform consumers with much better information. I think the smart labels are a vehicle for that. And, active and engaged consumers are showing a lot of interest in that. And so I think that's important. And so that, brings us over to efforts like Field to Market and others, where the ability to measure impacts and report this data along the supply chain is, more important. The thing I get this question a lot, and without trying to be trivial about it, I would suggest that a consumer try to eat something new. And what's behind that is that if we need one thing to drive regeneration, it's diversity. And so the more diverse food systems we can have, the more diverse demand signals we can have, that's going to help this task of creating new markets, creating a new food economy, getting those signals back down to producers. I don't know how many commodities Brad grows, but my guess is that it's fewer than he would like. And if he had more markets, it would aid him in his ability to bring diversity to the landscape, to the farm, and that would be additive.
I want to make sure we give Brad a chance to answer that question too. Brad, what would you like to see consumers do more of? Oh, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Like the other guy said, get informed. Everybody always say uneducated, but that's a terrible word. Informed is a great word for the consumer. And don't be afraid to ask the store owners, or if you're driving down the country road and there's a guy out there, pull in and talk to him. Most of them would spend a half hour and tell you what's going on and be glad to inform you. Back to the carbon thing too, real quick. A lot of guys going around trying to wrap up acres, get contracts signed right now. If there's any farmers listening, do not sign any contracts for carbon sequestration. That's all I have to say for the moment.
I love the word inform. I think another word that kind of comes back to what one of the other panelists was talking about earlier is interest, right? That curiosity, that interest to ask questions, to explore, to be on the same discovery and learning journey that I think that we all are on. Again, because we all are trying to achieve the same thing, but we're all still learning, and we need to be learning together about how actually we get there. Yep. And then making those choices, making those decisions to help support that pathway.
Yep. Chris, did you want to add something real quick? I want to make sure that Tara gets a chance to ask us another question from what
quick anecdote. I once asked one of our business leaders, I was frustrated as a consumer. I wanted a full gallon of Horizon organic milk, and I could only find the half gallons in my local grocery store. And so I raised this with one of our business guys. I was like, why can't I get this at X and X retailer? He said, ask him, call him up and ask him. And, at the end of the day, it's so simple. And we are the voters. The consumers are the voters on this. And we just need to keep on voting every single day for the products we want.
Fantastic point, and one that is really echoed in the comments. Speaking of voting, that's also going to matter. We're going to have a new farm bill coming up here, probably in the next year or two. So something for people to pay attention to. Tara, what else you got for us?
Yeah, I really liked what Chris said about our voting, voting with our wallets. So we got a lot of questions. I have two more, but I'll go with this one just in case there's not time. This came from a cotton farmer, and he asked if there is a place for regenerative ag in specialty crops. A lot of times he sees a lot of attention on some of the larger commodities, dairy, grains, and asked, what does that look like for specialty crops and just maybe not as well talked about crops?
Excellent point. Who's going to take that?
I can jump in there if you want. I mean, so what are there, 300 plus specialty crops out there? So this is obviously going to look very different for all of them, as folks said earlier. And I can only speak to almonds. Almonds is one of the specialty crops we work with, obviously a perennial tree. And, there's going to be a variety of different things. It may be pollination habitat. It may be different irrigation systems. It could be recycling the trees in a way that puts more mulch back into the soil and increases soil health through that way. So those are just a quick handful that happen to work for some almond growers. That's just almond growers, right? So I think everybody's going to have to go through that list and see what works best for them. And each system is going to have to develop that analysis.
I do want to just underline the core point here, and it did get repeated here in the comments too. We do really seem to focus on large acres, row crops when we're talking about this, and there is a lot of interest and demand from producers who are working with other kinds of crops, whether other kinds of row crops or other kinds of specialty crops. So let's just all keep that in mind. I hate to say it, but we are coming up to the top of the hour here. It is always so interesting. I wish we could spend another hour talking together. But I think that I want to just do a round robin to wrap up here. And I think the question I want to ask each of you is, what is the most important thing you want to see happen, or that you're looking forward to having happen as we accelerate the transition to regenerative agriculture and connect the consumer more closely to the way that our food, fiber, and fuel is being grown? So we'll just go around and ask each of you to think about that.
I'll start.
Thanks, Brad.
I would like to see more of the consumer's money go to the farmer that is providing the top product for the consumer, and eliminate the middleman running off with the easy cash. That's my point.
I think farmers across the United States are cheering you on for saying that, and it's a strong, important message we need to keep sending on. Terrific. Who wants to follow that?
I'm going to throw two things out there, I guess. One is, how do we think about some of these problems at an industry level, a food system level? In these early days, as you're trying to create solutions, sometimes we get going and we're going to create a solution that works for one brand or one company. But a farmer doesn't work just with one crop. There's rotations. And so if I'm the special snowflake and I want something that goes all the way through my value chain, that's not very helpful if the next year in the rotation on that same piece of land you've got a totally different crop. So I think we need to really press ourselves. Yes, let's go pilot, let's go learn things in these early days, but we need to keep an eye to how do we create a really open system that allows farmers and off-takers to be asking and working against similar objectives, and not, scattershot. Will drive farmers crazy if we don't get this pulled together.
Indeed. Terrific.
I'll maybe just add, I think, two things to throw out here. One, for us to really fully tell the story to consumer, we need to keep on pushing and implementing, right? And that means scale, and that means continuing to collect those quantified and verified outcomes. And so that's going to be years and years of work to do that, but we've got to have that scale to take the message and take the ultimate new brands to the consumer. The other thing I'd add to that relatedly is that we need to start working outside of our silos, right? Danone's not going to do this by ourselves. No one farmer is going to do this by themselves. We need the collective effort. And frankly, this is a good, hopefully, segue to Farm Bill conversations, perhaps on other panels. But how do we mix that private investment with the public investment? How do we actually leverage each other to get that scale?
I'll give Anjali the last word. I would just echo the things that have been said. I think the task that we have before us here to build a regenerative food system is unending. It will never be done. But it's a journey that gives farmers and consumers an opportunity to reconnect on common ground. And we see that as positive. We see that as part of the regenerative food economy, where there does need to be more rewards shared from consumers to farmers, new efforts taken up by farmers. And the way we think about this is an opportunity to really put put agriculture in a very positive light on contribution. We summarize all of our work under #GrowPositive. So if you want to see the narratives and the stories that we're talking about, go out on LinkedIn or Twitter and look under Grow Positive. And that's the story that we'd like to tell.
Michael, I think that's so well said, and I think I share some of the comments that Stephen, Brad, and Chris have also said as well. Just to pull it together, I'd offer a few C's. This is about curiosity, collaboration, choice in the choices for what gets done, and then how that value comes back. But most importantly, clarity and communication to bring consumers and farmers back together. I think there is a huge amount of hope and optimism for what can come. It is a challenging road. Make no mistake about it. I think Michael said that extremely well. But if we can keep that curiosity, collaboration, choice, clarity, and communication as we move forward, we'll be in a really great spot as we continue the journey.
Wow, that was beautifully wrapped up. I want to thank everyone who stuck with us and who joined us in the audience today. This has been a terrific conversation. It has been recorded and it will be archived. So after the Thanksgiving holiday, you can look for information to find it on Corteva's YouTube channel. We'll also be sharing it through Farm Journal. For those of you that want to learn more about America's conservation ag movement, you can check out trustinfood.com. You'll also see a new white paper that we just released today in honor of the Sustainable Ag Summit with our partners that is really about how digital and connected agriculture can help be one of the tools in the toolboxes that here to help accelerate this transition. And with that, I want to thank each and every one of you, Anjali, Stephen, Michael, Chris, and especially Brad, for joining us and sharing your wisdom, to Tara for sharing all of our conversation out in the wider interwebs, and look forward to seeing you all later today at the Sustainable Ag Summit. Thanks so much, everyone.